Forget the sanitized Hollywood bio. Meg Myles lived life on her own terms, with a string of forbidden performances, wild travels, and celebrity connections. These stories couldn't fit in Wikipedia, but they're all here. Early days and unusual beginnings. Before the fame, Meg Myles was far from ordinary. Born in Seattle in 1934, she grew up with big dreams despite her modest background. Her father, a World War II veteran, brought discipline to the family, but young Meg had an adventurous spark. Even as a teenager, she stood out, often captivating people with her natural charisma and confidence. In high school, she joined school plays and community theater. Friends noticed her striking looks and bold personality, qualities that hinted at a bigger future. After high school, Meg realized her ambitions couldn't be contained in Seattle. In the early 1950s, she packed her bags and headed to New York City. She took a job as a secretary to make ends meet. But the 9-to-5 life felt stifling. She craved excitement and something that would allow her to shine. Her big break came unexpectedly when a talent scout noticed her. Her unique blend of beauty and confidence made her hard to miss. Eager for a chance in the spotlight, Meg didn't hesitate to step into the world of modeling. Her rise in modeling was swift. Photographers loved her sultry poses, and her bold style caught the public's attention. Her look wasn't typical. It was glamorous and daring, with an edge that set her apart. But modeling wasn't enough for Meg. She felt drawn to the stage, and it wasn't long before she found herself in the world of burlesque. Her first performances were under a stage name. Even then, her charm and boldness were unmistakable. The audience loved her fearless style, and her reputation grew quickly. Meg was stepping into an industry that would shape her future, and she wasn't afraid to break a few rules to get there. Modeling may have been her introduction, but burlesque was where her personality shone. The burlesque scene, an insider's perspective. When Meg Myles entered the burlesque world in the 1950s, she wasn't just looking for fame. She wanted freedom. Hollywood had rules, but burlesque offered her a place to break them. With its risque performances and daring routines, burlesque allowed her to express herself in ways mainstream entertainment never could. She quickly made a name for herself at iconic venues like the Latin Quarter in New York. Audiences were captivated. They weren't just there to watch a show, they came to see her. Meg's routines stood out from the start. She blended elegance with rebellion, mixing dramatic costumes and sultry dance moves. She often wore feather-laden outfits, bringing a sense of drama to the stage. Each act was carefully crafted, with Meg commanding the audience's attention from start to finish. Soon, she became known for a signature routine with feather boas and strategic costume changes. It keeps viewers on the edge of their seats. One night, she performed a routine that became legendary. It involved a prop phone, with Meg playfully taking calls from imaginary suitors. She'd answer in exaggerated tones, sometimes giggling, sometimes scolding her pretend admirers. It was cheeky, a bit scandalous, and completely unique. The audience couldn't get enough. They roared with laughter and applause, but not everyone was thrilled. Club owners and local censors weren't amused. They worried her bold acts were too much for the club's image and too close to the line of respectability. Warnings came from all sides. She was told her acts might get her blacklisted from decent venues, but she didn't care. She pushed ahead, unafraid of what others thought. Her shows continued to sell out, and her reputation grew with every performance. Meg was balancing on the thin line between mainstream and taboo, and she loved it. Rejected roles and censorship battles. As Meg Myles' popularity grew, Hollywood soon came calling. By the late 1950s, she landed her first major film role, bringing her burlesque reputation into the mainstream. But Hollywood wasn't ready for her boldness. Her allure was both her ticket in and her obstacle. Directors admired her daring persona, but studio heads were wary. To them, she was a risk. too bold for the clean-cut image they preferred for leading ladies. Her first major clash with censorship came during the filming of a 1959 movie. Meg was cast for her looks and confidence, but once shooting began, producers panicked. They realized her raw, unfiltered style didn't align with the wholesome image they wanted. Scenes that showed her true personality were quickly toned down or even cut entirely. Meg was frustrated. She felt she'd been brought on to be herself, but Hollywood had other ideas. Another incident highlighted Hollywood's fear of her image. Meg was cast in a role that required a daring outfit, something she'd worn countless times on stage without issue. But when it came to the film, studio executives demanded a complete redesign. They were afraid her original costume was too provocative, fearing backlash from conservative audiences. Meg pushed back, arguing that this was her character and that changing the costume would ruin the role. But, as was often the case, the studio had the final say. These battles with censorship became a pattern in Meg's career. Her boldness and refusal to conform made her one of Hollywood's most controversial figures of the time. She gained a reputation for resisting the industry's strict standards, a stance that often came at a cost. She missed out on screen time, saw scenes cut, and sometimes lost roles entirely. Hollywood couldn't fully embrace her. She was simply too unconventional for their comfort. Despite the limitations placed on her, Meg didn't back down. She kept pushing against the rules, challenging the studio's narrow view of what a woman on screen could be. Infamous publicity stunts. Meg Myles understood the power of publicity, and she used it with flair. In 1962, she stirred up controversy with a photo shoot that almost got her blacklisted from a prominent magazine. She wore one of her bold burlesque outfits, a glamorous, feathered number that showcased her signature style. But the editorial team balked. The photos were fun and daring, but they didn't meet the magazine's conservative standards, and so they refused to publish them. Rather than being discouraged, Meg saw this as her chance to make an even bigger splash. A few weeks after the shoot, she appeared on a popular live radio show. The plan was to discuss her latest film, but Meg had other ideas. Instead, she used the interview to openly call out a few powerful Hollywood players. She didn't name names, but made it clear she was frustrated with the industry's double standards and controlling nature. This outspoken approach was rare, especially for actresses of her time, and it caught the attention of her fans. Her audience loved it. Here was an actress who wasn't afraid to speak up, even if it ruffled a few feathers. Not long after, Meg pulled another headline-grabbing stunt. She arrived unannounced at a major film festival in an outfit that had reporters buzzing for days. The gown was sleek, daring, and more than a little risque. It sparked rumors and gossip in the tabloids. Some reporters speculated she'd worn it to make a statement. Others thought it was simply Meg being Meg. Either way, her appearance dominated headlines, proving once again that she knew how to keep herself relevant and in control. These stunts weren't just for the sake of attention. For Meg, they were a way to maintain control of her public image. She understood the rules of Hollywood publicity and knew that staying in the limelight meant continually reinventing herself. Through her bold choices and unapologetic attitude, she managed to keep the public captivated. She wasn't just an actress. She was a master of self-promotion, always finding ways to keep people talking. Unexpected relationships and connections. Meg Myles' personal life was as dramatic and unpredictable as her on-stage persona. She had a string of high-profile relationships throughout the 1960s, drawing constant attention from the tabloids. Among her most famous romances was her on-and-off relationship with a well-known jazz musician. Their chemistry was undeniable, and their relationship was both passionate and turbulent. The pair were often seen together at New York jazz clubs, and their ups and downs played out in the press. For Meg, the jazz scene wasn't just about romance. It was a world that matched her daring, free-spirited nature. She loved the music, the atmosphere, and the energy, but her connections weren't limited to the music world. Meg had friendships with influential and often controversial figures from different walks of life. She was close to several artists, writers, and even political personalities who were known for pushing boundaries. One of her closest friends was a theater director famous for his avant-garde productions. He encouraged her to explore deeper, more expressive forms of art and introduced her to experimental circles. These friendships exposed Meg to a world beyond Hollywood, one where she could explore her creative side without limits. Some of her friendships raised eyebrows and rumors began to swirl. One particular rumor suggested she had ties to a politically divisive figure. Speculation ran wild, with some saying she was involved in behind-the-scenes advocacy. Though Meg never confirmed these claims, they added another layer to her public image. She was seen as a Hollywood rebel, unafraid to associate with people who challenged norms. Her friendships, much like her career, were bold, and they often fueled her unconventional image. These relationships, both romantic and platonic, contributed to her reputation as a fearless, independent spirit. She was drawn to people who defied expectations, just as she did. To those who knew her well, her friendships reflected her values. She was loyal to people, not to reputations. Cultural defiance and personal integrity. In the 1960s, Meg Myles wasn't just bending Hollywood's rules, she was breaking them outright. At a time when actresses were expected to be polite, reserved, and compliant, Meg had no intention of following the mold. She was determined to do things her way, no matter the consequences. Her first major act of defiance happened during the filming of a movie where the director suggested she alter her character to be more palatable for audiences. Meg stood her ground, responding, "If you want me in the role, you'll let me play it as it was written." Surprisingly, the director backed down, and she was allowed to stay true to her character. This set the tone for her career. Meg wasn't about to compromise who she was for anyone. Another instance of her defiance came when she refused to attend a public relations event for a film. The event was being held at a venue with policies that excluded certain groups. Meg was asked why she didn't attend, and she didn't hold back. "I won't pretend to support a place that doesn't treat people equally," she said. In a time when few stars were willing to take such stands, her decision sparked controversy. Yet, it also earned her the admiration of those who respected her stance on equality and justice. In an industry that often required women to stay quiet, smile, and follow the rules, Meg was a rare figure. Her actions sent a message. She wouldn't sacrifice her integrity for anyone, not even Hollywood. These principles sometimes cost her roles and opportunities, but they earned her respect from fans, friends, and fellow performers who saw her as a voice for change. Unrecorded private escapades. Though Meg Myles' career kept her between Hollywood and New York, she had a deep love for travel. Her trips abroad were rarely covered by the press, but they were some of her most cherished experiences. In 1965, she took an extended break to spend several months in Europe, moving between Paris, Rome, and small towns along the way. She dove into local art and theater scenes, visiting galleries, attending plays, and meeting artists. These trips weren't just vacations, they were an escape. It was a chance for her to connect with like-minded creatives who valued freedom and expression as much as she did. In Italy, she became close with a group of local artists and intellectuals. The group decided to take a spontaneous road trip along the Amalfi Coast, with Meg joining them. One traveler later described her as in her element, completely free-spirited. She spent the journey engaged in deep conversations about art, philosophy, and the meaning of independence. Hollywood actresses typically traveled with entourages, but not Meg. She valued her independence, preferring to explore new places on her own terms. In 1967, her love for new cultures took her to South America. Meg spent time in Brazil, arriving during a period of intense artistic growth known as the Tropicalia movement. She quickly connected with the local music and art scenes, drawn to their bold, expressive styles. She attended performances incognito, blending in with the crowd and observing as one of them. Her time there left a strong impression, shaping her own style and approach. Brazil's vibrant energy and fearless artistry resonated with her. Her travels were a rare escape from the constraints of Hollywood, a chance to discover parts of herself outside the industry's watchful eyes. She later described her journeys abroad as a reset button that allowed her to step away from the pressures of fame. These experiences weren't shared with the public but remained some of her most meaningful memories. Her trips were filled with spontaneity, self-discovery, and connections that enriched her life and fueled her adventurous spirit. For Meg, these private escapes were as much a part of her story as her life on stage and screen. Life away from the spotlight. By the early 1970s, Meg Myles' Hollywood career had slowed. Roles were scarce, and the industry was shifting its focus to a younger generation of stars. For many, this would have seemed like a decline, but for Meg, it felt like a natural change. After 2 intense decades in the spotlight, she was ready for something quieter and more personal. Fame had served its purpose. And now, she was looking for a deeper sense of fulfillment. Returning to New York, Meg found herself drawn back to the theater. She joined smaller productions and off-Broadway plays, reconnecting with the performing arts in a more intimate way. On stage, she was able to explore themes that were close to her heart: independence, resilience, and the strength that comes from being true to oneself. She even dabbled in writing, adding her own voice to scripts that spoke to these ideas. Though these projects didn't bring the same level of fame, Meg felt fulfilled in a way Hollywood hadn't offered her. Outside of acting, Meg focused on personal projects, often volunteering her time for causes she cared about. She became involved with organizations supporting young women, hoping to help them grow into strong, confident adults. She once shared, "If I can help one woman understand her own worth, that's more valuable than 100 movies." Meg wanted to inspire others to live boldly, the way she always had. Her work with young women became a passion. It allowed her to channel her experiences into guidance and mentorship. Meg never made an official announcement about retiring. She simply slipped out of the public eye. Content with her quieter life, she left Hollywood behind without fanfare. Friends and family describe her later years as peaceful and full of purpose. She had the same vibrant energy, the same passion, but now it was directed at personal fulfillment rather than public attention. Unfiltered memoirs and unpublished stories. As her career slowed, Meg Myles began writing her life story. These weren't the sanitized tales Hollywood wanted. They were raw, unfiltered memories. She wrote about her start in burlesque, the secrets of her risque routines, and battles with industry censors. Friends who read parts of her memoirs describe them as unapologetic and real. She held nothing back. One story tells of an encounter with a well-known producer. He made an inappropriate advance, expecting her to play along. Meg stood her ground, telling him off then and there. In an industry where women were often punished for pushing back, her move was bold. She didn't just want to share her victories. She wanted to show the darker side of her career, too. Another chapter dives into her love affair with a famous jazz musician. Their relationship was passionate and chaotic, and she told the story exactly as it was. There were fights, heartbreaks, and rare moments of joy. She didn't hide the struggles or pretend things were perfect. This was love, but it was messy, and she wanted people to see it honestly. Though her memoirs remain unpublished, excerpts occasionally surface in interviews with her friends. In one, a friend recalled her saying, "I want people to know the truth, the real me, not just the headlines." Meg saw her memoirs as a way to tell her story on her terms, without Hollywood's interference. These weren't just gossip-filled chapters. They were her life, from the highs to the lows. Her memoirs are still a hidden treasure, filled with the stories Hollywood doesn't tell. For those who knew her, these writings show her strength, her stubbornness, and her refusal to compromise. If they're ever published, they might finally reveal the full picture of Meg Myles, bold, complex, and entirely herself. Life in private circles. After stepping away from Hollywood, Meg Myles chose a quieter life, but maintained connections with a close-knit circle of friends, many of whom shared her artistic spirit. Though she was out of the public eye, she often hosted gatherings for fellow actors, artists, and writers in her New York apartment. It became a haven for Hollywood outsiders, those who, like her, resisted the industry's norms. Among her circle were a few familiar faces, including former co-stars, writers, and independent directors. These gatherings were intimate, lively affairs where conversations covered everything from art to activism. Meg remained opinionated, especially about the industry she'd left behind. According to one friend, she once remarked, "I loved performing, but I refused to be their puppet." Her guests often appreciated her insights, finding inspiration in her unwavering independence. In the late 1970s, Myles developed a close friendship with an avant-garde filmmaker known for challenging the traditional boundaries of cinema. She appeared briefly in one of his experimental films, an uncredited role in a black-and-white short that screened at underground festivals. This small, non-mainstream appearance was a far cry from her earlier roles, but it gave her the freedom to perform without constraints. Those who saw the film recall her raw, unaffected performance, a testament to her talent and her love for pure, uninhibited art. Outside her artistic gatherings, Meg spent time traveling to visit old friends across the country, many of whom had retired from Hollywood or the theater scene. She found joy in these visits, reconnecting with people who had shared her path and understood the unique challenges she'd faced. Though far from the world of fame and glamour, Meg Myles remained true to herself, cultivating a life filled with meaningful relationships, unfiltered expression, and an undying love for the art that had defined her. On November 12, 2019, Meg Myles passed away at the age of 84, just 2 days shy of her 85th birthday.